Typography is the king of the content. If the type is bad, the design is gonna fail, no matter how nice the colors are or the layout is. So there is lots of resources online where you can learn about the typography, but I wanted to record the video where you can quickly take this as a guidance for your next project. So how to set up the proper typography system for your project. First things first, you need to select the type. When you're selecting your type, it's important to understand the classification of the type. So today I want to focus on serif and sans serif because these are the bases. If you understand this, the rest is going to be easy. And then when it comes to the subcategories, I like this particular classification, and you will find many of them because this is easy to compare and it's easy to understand as well. So when you say humanist, you understand from the name that it has some human touch to it. It is very dynamic. There is organic look to it, and you can understand that there is handwritten calligraphy origins both of the fonts. So the organic serif here, calligraphic style terminals, angled stress, counters that are wide open, and angled stress for sans serif as well. And here are some examples. For the transitional one, you will find much more geometric look to the forms, but still there is some sort of human touch to the letters. So that's why it's transitional, in between static and humanist. So you'll see more geometric serif bracket, you'll see rounded terminals, some of the letters now having vertical stress. The counters are wide open. The capital G has this per, and also closed apertures in sans serif letters. And here are some examples of transitional. When it comes to static, this is again next step to closer to geometric. So now you have geometric shapes, which is like rectangle for the sans serif. You have vertical stress for all of the letters, or for most of them. You have bowl-shaped terminals for serif, and very noticeable separation between sans serif transitional and the static is the horizontal terminals. Here you have the terminals which are horizontal, and overall this is very static. Here are some examples of the fonts. And then when it comes to geometric, the shapes are constructed using the geometric forms, which are square, triangle, and circle. And also, in most of the cases, the X height is going to be very low. And here are some examples. I would advise to always start with one type only and add a pair if there is a necessity. The less fonts, the easier it is to control the system. So one of the easiest approaches is just to pair humanist sans serif with humanist serif, or vice versa, or to pair transitional sans serif with transitional serif, and so on. The only thing is, when it comes to static, the body copy doesn't work with the serif fonts because these are having lots of contrast and very tiny thin lines which are not noticeable in the small size. But also you can compare or pair the geometric with humanist, which is like these two are the most far away from each other. But the way you can pair them with each other is based on the characteristics. For example, the X high of both of these fonts is quite comparable, and some of the shapes are also comparable. So why not to pair? Another easy way to go is to select two fonts from same foundry. Usually they will keep in mind the shapes for whichever font they produce so that they are easy to pair with each other. So now I'm using two fonts from the same foundry, which is Pangram, which is one of my favorite. Now, if you want to go with the same font, you see that it also gives a very nice contrast. And it really depends on what kind of tone of voice you want to depict. Another way to go is, and this is the easiest out of all of them, is to just go with the collection of the fonts. And that collection would have family for the sans serif and family for serif. So here you will see a very nice combination of serif and sans serif because this is one family. And these kind of titles are quite trendy nowadays when you use serif and sans serif next to each other. Having a list of few favorite type foundries is going to help you a lot when it comes to selecting the font, because it's going to be much faster and easier for you to go through those websites and select the one which you like, because you already trust those foundries. Just visiting those websites from time to time and seeing the new typefaces and just trying them out, it's a very good exercise. Here is the list of my favorite type foundries. I'm going to include the links in the description. And then the next phase is to check the font in use. So TypeWolf, fonts in use, and sometimes it's the Foundry website itself that's going to show the fonts in use. This is going to allow you to get the sense of what this type is capable of. You'll see some examples and you'll get inspired. After that, you can try to apply some of the techniques, some of the things that you liked in the font of use inspiration. The next step is to start scaling your type. And I like to start with very high contrast approach. And then based on the need of the project, you can tone it down a little bit. And also keeping in mind that the smaller the type is, the more noticeable the change is, the jump is between the sizes. So the jump between 14 and 12 is going to be much more noticeable than the jump between, let's say, if you had 90 pixel and 88 pixel here. That's why you will have to use more of the sizes in a small range. And then the larger you go, you can really scale it up with a huge contrast. In terms of styling in the UI library, I like this approach from Uber design system, where you divide the types of the typography into the display, heading, label, paragraph, and also you can add mono, which is useful for the digits. The next step is to define your line height. So the recommended range is somewhere in between 120 and 150%. It depends also on the width of the paragraph. The wider the paragraph is, the higher the line height is recommended. Keep in mind that if you are following the 4-pixel grid, it's recommended to use the numbers for the line height which are divisible by 4. And if you are following the 8-pixel grid, it's gonna still sit on the grid, but in this example you'll see that it's every alternate line which is sitting on the grid, which is still fine. But 25 or 27, things like that, it's gonna create you some problems when you want to keep the pixel perfect design system. But sometimes you can go out of this range. The smaller the size of the font is, the larger you can go. You can go up to 170. And the larger your type is, you can go down to 120. Or if you have a very small caption, you can go to 110 because the width of the paragraph is quite small. Talking about the width, The recommended width of the paragraph is 45 to 80 characters per line. By the way, there is a max line length plugin in Figma that allows you to quickly analyze the length so that you don't have to count it. And if you go to something like 156, this is not easy to read because you'll be lost and you'll be tired when you get to the end of this line. But sometimes you can break the rules and challenge the approach. So in this example, it's super wide line and super tight as well, super hard to read. It's done intentionally. I feel like the readability wasn't the concern of this graphic design exercise, and the text itself was meant to be more like a graphic design asset rather than the readable text. Or in some other cases, you'll see very narrow paragraphs, which is much more readable, but still this is made to portray some certain dynamic look, and sometimes that's more of the priority over the readability. The next step is to define the letter spacing. Depending on the type of the font, you will have to adjust the letter spacing based on the sizes. So sometimes the font by default is very wide, and sometimes by default it's quite narrow. And based on that, you'll have to adjust all of these parameters. But one thing to keep in mind, and a thing that really works well for the fonts that are static especially, is to go minus for the letter spacing in the large sizes. And I'm narrowing down by 6% in the large one. And the smaller you go, the less of that narrowing is going on until you reach the point of 0, and then you go to plus letter spacing. Because in the smaller size, the letters tend to be attached to each other and hard to be read. So the smaller the letters are, the more of the letter spacing you need. Depending on the type of the font, sometimes you will have 0 here, even in the smallest size, because the font itself by default it's very wide. Or either way around, it can go to 0 at 40% because it's overall very narrow. Some of the forgotten techniques from the print are indent and outdent. The spacing is being used everywhere in the web to separate the paragraphs. Now you start seeing this trend coming back to web as well, especially on the sites on awards. What it allows you to do is it gives you additional power line, and sometimes aligning the things to this second power line allows you to create more interesting look to your composition. And also it saves some vertical space. So in this design, I used both of the indent and outdent. So here I have the outdent, then this is the indent, and then again the outdent. So the combination of both of these helps to create a bit more interesting look. And for example, here the indent allowed me to align this text with the paragraph on the top. And also it allowed me to place the label inside of the first line of this paragraph. And then last but not least, the digits. So when you want to compare the digits with each other, for example, there is a table, it's hard to see how many of the digits are here and here. For example, here you have 4, here you have 5, but it looks like the 4 is larger as a number. That's why you have monospace types of the digits in some of the fonts. And this allows you to easily compare price and to know which one is higher right away. Now I'd like to talk about some common mistakes in typography. I hope this is going to be particularly useful for the starting out designers. It's much easier to learn these mistakes now rather than figuring it out after years of practice. So the first is type selection. In this example, I'm using Swiss International as the main type. It works well. It holds the composition together. It's very narrow as well. I put -6 or something like that in the letter spacing. If you select some humanist font, this is Frutiger, you will see that it starts to clash with each other. It starts to touch because of the nature of the shapes. So it's not really working well for this particular composition. So you have to add letter spacing to fight with that problem. But then now you see that this is not working at all. It's not working as a solid piece of the object. It's more like scattered letters across the design. So which means that with this particular approach, it's not working. You need something more of traditional center aligned or something like that to be able to use this font. That's why it's very important to know what you are using from start and to know which kind of look and feel you want to go for. And this old example of Apple's ad, however, you will find that they don't care about the letters touching each other or overlapping each other. And this is quite bold approach, and I like it. And again, depends on how you want to go with your look and feel. But sometimes you can go with this approach as well. Too many styles in your typography will make the design look very busy. So if you have bold here and then thin and then again bold, if you even add the gradient on top of that, this all makes your life much harder as a designer and also as a visitor of the website. It's very hard to read and it has lots of visual noise. The next is lack of contrast. So the lack of contrast can be either in the color or in the size. So here you will see that the size difference between these two is almost nothing. That's why it looks more like a mistake rather than the intentionally given contrast. And then when it comes to the color contrast, it's important to keep the text readable. So if you go very light gray, it's not going to be visible. No one's going to see or read that, or probably want to read that, even if they can read that. Then another example is having too small text and also justified text if you don't use the hyphen technique. Because if you don't use that, you'll start seeing the reverse between the words. And also you need to go minimum of 12 in the mobile. Then another thing is the thin text. I like the thin text, but also it's very dangerous if you don't use it in a proper way. So this is the proper way. You have thin text, which is a large title, and it's super beautiful. It works well. But then if you go to something like this, where you have a thin text for the small elements and the thin text is it's mixed with a bit more bold style and with the different colors, and also it's mixed with the bold icons here. Now it's hard to scan and read because it's not meant to be small. So if you want to use the thin, try to avoid any small sizes, only the large sizes. When it comes to letter spacing, this trend was very popular back then on Behance, like 10 years ago probably. So be careful with adding the letter spacing, even if it's a small type, because it might start to fall apart. So that's it for today. If you want to learn more about the typography, I recommend you go over Mario Shestak's course on awards. I'm going to include his link below. I hope you found this video useful. If so, please share this with other designers and don't forget to smash that like and subscribe to my channel. And until the next time.